And thanks so much to Novel for hosting us and for inviting me to be in conversation with Claire and for supporting not only Little T, but they've supported Claire's novel for 2018, which is set in Memphis, Morning Dove. Claire also has a novella, Autumn Window, which is set in Memphis, that appears in the book A Southern Season. And though she has several other books that she's published, these Southern family sagas are, to me, kind of what she is the queen of this genre. And I can't get enough of them. I keep waiting for one more and one more and one more. Little T was a finalist in the Faulkner Society International Competition and the Chanticleer Review's Somerset Awards for Literary Fiction. A Scene for Little T won a position in Southern Writers Magazine's top 10 short stories of 2018, and Deep South Magazine listed it on their summer reads list. So congratulations, Claire, on all your success for a novel that just released in May. Wow. So Little T is set in Como, Mississippi, Memphis, and Heber Springs, Arkansas. And it's about female friendships and healing the past. There have been a lot of great reviews already written, but one of my favorites was by Jesse Davis of the Memphis Flyer, and it was great. And one thing he said that really struck a chord with me is about Claire. He says, she works to tease out the subtle connections between her characters. Capturing those small, honest human interactions is her motivation. As she says, I was aiming for beauty and excellence of language. And that excellence of language, that lyrical, poetic voice that Claire has, it's like you read a book and you go, oh, that's a Claire Fullerton book. And so she's definitely done that again in Little T. Even though Claire's going to be talking with the book club in Memphis in July, she promised no spoiler alerts in tonight's event. But I'd like for her to tell us a little more about the book, and I'd love for her to read some of her lyrical voice in her very lyrical voice. Claire?
Thank you, Susan. I appreciate it. And it's great to be here with Novel Bookstore. Next time I do hope it's in person. But Little T, my fourth traditionally published novel, and it is essentially the story of female friendships and Southern culture and the method one goes through in healing their own past or reconciling their own past. And it occurred to me that the best place to do that is in the company of really good lifelong friendships. And I went into the writing of Little T with just one aim, and that was to capture the nuances of female friendships, the way that when you have lifelong friends, and I don't know a woman who doesn't have this, one or two or three girlfriends that have known them since they were perhaps 10 or 11, 12. And now that we're, older, to be able to retain those friendships and just to be gifted enough when people know who you are, know your history, and just the language that they share, between them. Typically, there's a sense of humor. There are inside jokes. There is not ever the need to go into much of a backstory because your friends were there and already know it. And I've been fascinated with that. I know I can point to three girlfriends that I've had, all from Memphis for as long as I can remember. And, whenever anything worth reporting happens to me, they're the first ones I call to tell. And it was wanting to capture really the magic of that and just really get into the middle of what that is that spawned the beginning of Little T. And yet I didn't have an outline and I didn't have much of an aim in mind other than let me just start writing how it is that three friends that are different from each other, that knew each other when they were young and that now live in separate parts of the country. How do they talk? And then I decided, well, let's give one of the characters a problem that the other two want to help solve, because it also occurred to me that you take one problem and you put it in the hands of three different women and you'll get three different solutions. And now why do we get that? Because of the individuals' backstories. Who are they? what is their frame of reference? How did they achieve that frame of reference? What's going on in their backstory? You know, what made them the way that they are today? And so obviously for a bit of dynamic, I gave one of them, you know, a bigger problem, and the other two personalities are so opposite from each other that I knew that alone, if I could just create that I would have at least a fun story to tell. And I got 25 pages into this, and I was having a good time. And the only thing truthful that I drew from was that in life, I do have a friend who's a doctor of veterinary medicine, but the rest of it, I was all completely winging it, including the narrator and what her backstory was. And so I realized, now, why didn't the narrator, I said it in page 1 of the book, why doesn't she want to fly from California back down to the South? What happened? Because I've got to tell the reader, because the reader's going to want to know. And so I just started telling this story. Well, she grew up in Como, Mississippi, 3rd generation working farm. You know, that the Wakefields have always been on the land, worked the land, owned the land. And I was thinking, how is that? And who's around them, by the way? Who's around them? If the narrator, Celia Wakefield, grew up this way, who's around her? And I invented Thelonious first. And Thelonious was the caretaker of the Wakefield plantation. So we're talking, I put it like more than 200 acres of cotton and soybean. And you know, what about Thelonious? I love that name. And well, he walks around with a gun. He's a black man. He knows all, he sees all. He knows everything there is to know about the woods. What about his family? So I started writing about his family, and that's how I came up with the character Little T, who is the narrator's age exactly. So now you've got a black girl and a white girl, and they are growing up side by side from birth on the same property, footloose and fancy-free in that environment in the 1980s. And I arrived at the 1980s because now I've got the 3 friends that have convened, met in Memphis, went out to a farm in Olive Branch, got in the car and drove to the lake in Heber Springs, Arkansas. And I was just winging it about what they were talking about how they were going to relate to each other and all of that. And it comes that Celia Wakefield's backstory with Little T, side by side her best friend at the time, it unfolds for the narrator. And suffice it to say that Little T is written in 2 time frames. So while we're at the lake with the 3 women friends, solving the mysteries of life, because women are incredibly wise and deep and introspective and soulful, and just the dynamic while they were discussing life, love, marriage, you know, we're older now, what happened to our youth, and all of these things that women talk about when they get together. Celia, the narrator's backstory unfolds, and there's always a trigger in the modern time that sets her to contemplate her backstory, because she has not yet, in her late 40s, completely reconciled it. And yet she knows that if it's ever going to be confronted, really looked at, reconciled, it is in the company of her 2 really good friends who do not judge her, that have been by her side forever, that no matter what, they are there for her. Tight bonds, incapable of being broken. It's that kind of a setup. So it's a safe haven for Celia to examine her past. And so in creating Celia Wakefield's family, her friendship with Little T, the players in her family, I put a lot of dynamic in that as well. I have the father as being, you know, manically depressed. He drinks too much, but he's a beautiful, poetic man. And I could see him in my mind's eye. And then I was thinking, well, how would that be to grow up with a father who is mercurial in nature, if you will? And how would that impact the family? And the mother, I wanted her Southern and beautiful. And I put grandparents in the story. What is their impact to Celia Wakefield? And all of this it unfolds into a very specific episode in Little T, and there is a bit of a fallout afterwards. And so summarily, that's what Little T is about. And I'm going to read y'all just a little bit of a description. I'm not going to read the dialogue because I want to get that to the readers. You know, when you give the readers characters, you want them to be able to personalize it. That the reader tells me who these people are, and the reader tells me how they hear their voices and their accents. And so I'm going to read you just a little bit in the latter part of the book, and the way the chapters are, the headings are as simple as this. Thank you, Eva Marie Everson, whose idea this was, my editor. It says, Como, Mississippi, sometime in the 1980s. Because my mother was a first-generation American, there was a side of her shining in the ancestral red tartan tones of her parents' native Scotland. It was more than the fresh-faced, ruddy gold look of her. It was her way of relating to the world from a premise of earth and sky. When I think of my mother, I think of autumn, light breeze, and wood smoke. At the memory of her face, a feeling arises to stir my soul's embers, pointing me homeward to the place I'll always belong. Though I can summon the feeling at will, it hurts too much to linger. There's too much inside of me now that can't accept she's gone. What happens when a mother dies is she takes back the part of her she should have left to save you. More times than I care to admit, I've searched for that refuge, only to feel betrayed and lost. It's disillusionment, really, of her life's inevitabilities. There's no reconciling any of it. It burns too close to the skin. But memory can be a sustaining thing. And when I think of my mother, I think of movement. The way she walked across a room. The way she channeled the light when she smiled. A list of idiosyncrasies made my mother unique to me. Most prominent were her Scottish superstitions she clung to with such devotion. I could fill a notebook with the listing of these, beginning with the bonfire on Guy Fawkes Day and ending with the way she handled household scissors, the blades pointed toward her lest she could sever a close personal tie. Most of her superstitions were acquired from her Scottish mother, Eileen Montgomery, a widow by the time I was born, who died when I was 8. My vague recollection of Eileen elicits lavender dusting powder, frail arms around me, hair the color of November wheat, twisted in a spiraling braid. The impression my mother's mother made on me was a lasting one, so much so that to this day I can't bring myself to cut my long hair. Gran, as we called her, was so enchanting. She managed to bring out the best in Celia Wakefield, who gave her a pass, I suspect, because Eileen was also a mountain girl. That Gran was a Highlander abated the suspicions of my father's mother, who was Scotch-Irish by lineage and mistrusted anyone else otherwise. Eileen's North Argyllshire burr touched something atavistic in Celia Wakefield because it marched in the same cadence and sang in the same notes as her clan's linguistic tendencies in rural North Carolina. My mother always said the two women understood each other in some intrinsic way. There was something pagan about both. They had an impulse towards navigating life's roadmap via talismans and signs. But whereas Grandmother Wakefield's understanding came from a premise both armored and fear-based, Eileen's was of a mystical variety, more awe-inspired and God-struck than anything else. In the air above my grandmother's, no bird's flight went beyond scrutiny. No phase of the moon, nor owl's hoot went without specific interpretation. Under the influence of female divination, I grew up thinking coincidence and strange convergence was the language of women. And so it was. When little T called me in Knoxville, it took me very little of her inference to set me on edge.
All right. So if any of you have not yet read Little T, that'll make you want to. I mean, I'm enchanted. And of course I read it. I'm enchanted by that. And I was thinking, Claire, about how you're from Memphis, and yet you've been living in California for like 30 years.
Yes.
And so, yeah, and yet you set Little T in the South. And I know you feel strongly about the South as place. So does living in California help by giving you some distance from where you grew up, or hinder and make it harder? And I'm also thinking about your readers. We're both Southern writers,
Yeah.
and we both want to write about universal things so that we'll have readers beyond just the South. But
Yes.
so yeah. So do you, what's been your readers outside the South's reaction? I mean, I know it just came out, and I mean, do you feel like it has universal appeal?
That's a great question. I do, and that was my intention. And I think that to your point, or to your question of why I said it in the South, I think that I've always had a fascination with the South because I came to it as an outsider. I was born in Wayzata, Minnesota, like we all know where that is. It's the lake area outside of Minneapolis, the Minnetonka, Lake Minnetonka, most have heard of that. And that's where I was born. And I moved to Memphis when I was 10, and I never really got over my fascination with the South. My mother, born and raised in Memphis, and that's how we got there. But for me, it was incredibly poignant and significant to my coming of age to be 10 years old and an outsider from the North and viewing the South from an outsider's lens. And I can tell you that to this day, I don't believe I've ever really lost that, that I will always celebrate the South. And by celebrate the South, I mean celebrate its people, because I find them, and I'll say this about Southerners, they definitely know who they are. And that's what I've always loved about the South, is everybody is just certain of who they are and where they fit in. And it's an entire consciousness of culture, in my opinion. And I love that. And yes, I mean, I lived in Memphis for 19 years. I've lived in California for 30, and yet I still consider myself a Southerner. And so to your point about, the universal themes and writing about the South, I do it on purpose. I certainly did it on purpose with Little T, because it is such a rich and dense fabric in the South. Everything from the climate to the terrain, to the people and the people's stories. And there's so much meaning and tradition in the South that is upheld still today, that I admire, and is so worth telling about in a story, for Little T. And so there was that. But the universal aim that I had with Little T was to say that it doesn't matter where in the world you live. It's the idea of the ties that bind in female friendships. And it's the idea of the highs and the lows that we go through in life. I gave one of the women, the character Ava, was in something that we've all been through at some time sooner or later in our lives, which is, wait a minute, let me stand still, take stock. Is my life going in the right direction? Let me just take a look here, and I want to evaluate everything. And I think that if you can name me one person that hasn't been through that at some point in their life, just let me know, because I don't know anybody. And I think that plenty of us have been through, that last grasp on youth, when you don't really want to let go, not quite yet. And if you are letting go, you're still sort of examining the past and your youth and what made you. That I have noticed, as I've grown older, that so many people, even myself included, we still identify with who we were when we were 18 or in our 20s. There's a part of us that still really identifies with our consciousness at that time, our mind frame. And so that, I think, is a universal theme that I wanted to, really get in there with in Little T. And then, of course, the idea of when we have something damaging in our past, that it's almost easier to outrun it, and just pull a geographic, as they say, relocate, start over in another part of the country where nobody knows you and nobody knows your history and nobody knows your story. It's just easier. But can you really ever outrun that, And so the story itself being fiction, but the premises, I believe, are quite universal.
Absolutely. Listening to you just share that story, this thing about voice keeps coming back to me. And I didn't know Claire back when she spent a decade working in radio. Some of y'all that are watching, I'm sure, did know that she was at WEGR Rock 103. I mean, when I first moved to Memphis in '88, were you? I can't remember.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I was on the radio.
I just didn't know who you were, you know, and FM 100 and several others. So what I'm thinking is how much did that, listening to people's stories and hearing their voice, like, did that influence you to be a writer? Do you think that helps you with your writing too?
I think it was all part and parcel too, and so was, you know, the fact that I've kept up with ballet since I was very, very young. What I have always been drawn to and explored is the arts.
Mm-hmm.
And music radio was that to me, you know, because, you know, it's all about music and all about the songwriters and all about the guys that play guitar. You know, to me, it's like, talk about an awestruck calling. You know, those people that can, the singer-songwriters, you know, they to me are the top of the line. And, you know, I really wanted to be involved in that. And the art of communication, you know, it's called an art for a reason. And writing comes from a similar sweet spot, you know, so does dance. And so being an artist is a way of viewing the world, a way of interacting in the world, a premise from which you operate, you know, and it doesn't matter to me which art it is that somebody has chosen to develop, you know, but it's all along the lines of a spiritual nature to me. I think the arts and their creation are of the spirit. And so answering your question about did radio and the story, it wasn't really that. I think that my fascination for stories and storytellers came from my mother, who was a wonderful, engaging, dynamic, charismatic storyteller.
Well,
You know, liked to talk about people, and she would describe the penny in the corner. You know, I mean, she was unbelievable with her eye for detail. And so, you know, being observant, you know, so, you know, all of that, I don't really think that there was any tie-in from broadcasting to writing, other than to say the overarching arena was that both are the arts, both are an experience in the arts.
Another thing I was thinking about in your book, I don't know about other readers, but when I read a book, whenever there's a scene in there that I can relate to because of my own personal experience, I always latch onto it. And like, I grew up water skiing and I loved being around boats and all of that. So the scene where Tate Foley, who becomes Celia's fiance, takes her and her friends on fishing on his family boat on Horseshoe Lake, I could just go, oh, that reminds me of, you know, my time wasn't the 80s, oh, it was back in the 60s when I used to go water skiing with my friends. And so was this something you did frequently growing up, or what inspired this scene?
Bobby Pigeon inspired that scene. Okay, long story short, I am gifted to know two Southern gentlemen, Ted O'Brien of Memphis and Bobby Pigeon Jr. of Memphis. And I knew that I wanted to, and again, I'm a writer who feels my way through a story. I feel my way through the story. And I remember thinking, but I want to talk about the hunting and the fishing in the woods in the Delta. And I know who to call. So I talked with both men, but while I was on the phone with Bobby Pigeon, and I wanted him to describe for me what kind of fishing rods are we talking about? And what exactly, you know, when you would go fishing, where would you go? What was it like? What would, you know, tell me everything. And he knew exactly what I was after, and he was very clear, but in speaking to him was the greatest conversation. I was on the phone with him for like an hour and a half. And he told me a funny story about when he was fishing and one of his buddies sat on a fishing lure. And it was the funniest story I'd ever heard. And I just thought, you know, you mind if I steal it? You know? Yeah. And I ended up, just because the story itself was so funny, changing it as you do and working it into the story. But, you know, that's the art of writing, I think, is that, you know, and to a lot of writers, they can identify with what I'm saying, that for me, it's a very stream of consciousness thing when I'm writing. And when I say I don't have an outline and I don't have much of a plan, although I have a point I want to make, it is, and when you're alone and when you're in your writer's cave and you get that thread with your mind and you keep that thread for months, you know, it is amazing to me what ends up on the page. And I think that we pull from all kinds of things that we haven't even considered until we're right in the middle of telling the story, and all of a sudden these interesting things come up and appear on the page. And so although there are some people that think that I have a very specific plan and intent when I write a book and I do everything, no, I don't. You know, I am not that lofty and evolved. You know, I am essentially winging it and telling myself a story as well, because I think that the reader, therefore, can discover it all along with me, that there's something very authentic about this. Is very, very, very true, very authentic, you know, all of this, and we are finding our way together.
Yeah. Well, you know,
I like the idea of that. But yeah, that's where that fishing story came. Okay. And it was just too good to pass up.
Oh, I love it. That's fun.
Yeah.
So switching to a little more serious topic, I was wondering, I think readers would probably like to know if the race component in Little T was something that you wanted to make a statement over, or in light of current events right now. But how would you address that?
Oh, I understand. It was uncanny. I mean, I wrote Little T a year and a half ago, or maybe 2 years ago. Eva Marie Everson can probably refresh my memory. Year and a half ago, for all intent and purposes, and in telling the story and letting it all unfold. No, I did not have an intent, and I wouldn't make a statement ever as a writer, because that's robbing the reader, I think, of forming their own conclusion. And, you know, readers are intelligent people. They're very intelligent. And those that tend to read do it as a way of life, you know. And I know for myself, I'm a voracious reader. And I like to glean from, I mean, I really do. I mean, I love it. Intuit and interpret my own understanding. And so for me as a writer, you know, my job, for lack of a better word, is to, well, how about this, Susan? In the writing world, we hear bantered around, show, don't tell. And we hear it a million times over. If we have a good editor, they will bust us on that. You know, you're telling and you need to be showing. And so that, I think, is how I go into every project, every book I've ever written, is wanting to show and never tell, because I'm not here to grandstand or to preach or to say what my opinion is. I'm here to paint a picture, and that the reader can intuit for themselves, you know. So this business of writing for me is a lot like comparing notes, in that I am saying, for instance, in Little T, here's my take on this. Here's my understanding of, you know, the culture and the times and these kinds of things, so that the reader can say to themselves, you know, oh, well, I think that, or my feeling is that, you know. So I like it to be a fair exchange between the author and the reader, and you know, it's really not my way as a writer to make a statement about much anything.
That's great. And, you know, I think, I don't know how many of our audience tonight are writers, but there usually are a lot. And as a writer and a voracious reader, I always love to learn from my fellow writers. And I was thinking a question as a writer, I'd be interested in, your agent is Julie Gwynn of the Seymour Literary Agency. So how does she give her input to your manuscripts? How does that work, the writer working with an agent? I was just curious.
She's been incredibly supportive of my work, and I tell you who's been the most is Eva Marie Everson, because what I've done is never shown anybody anything I've ever been working on. I am not with a writer's group, critique group. Mm-hmm. I don't I just, you know, I'm a lone wolf in the wilds of California, and it suits me. You know,
Mhm.
it suits me. It's a very personal, you know, creative process for me. And I've been lucky. Eva Marie Everson has edited my last two books, Morning Dove and Little T, and she was the one that got me involved with Through an Autumn Window, the novella. And I've just given it to her, and she has, you know, cleaned it up and
Yeah.
this kind of thing, but has respected my voice and my process, you know, and that's, I understand that that's very, very rare, you know, and then we get Julie Gwynn involved, need be, you know, but so far I've had both books with Firefly Southern Fiction, and Julie has been all for it.
Great.
So that's
That's
what that relationship is.
always good to hear. I'm going to
Yeah,
ask you one more question, and then we've got some questions that have been coming in from,
great.
from readers. So the line that kept striking me in your book that I wanted you to comment on is when you say, the thing about being a Southern girl is they let you run loose until the time comes to shape you. Ooh, because I grew up in Mississippi. So I want to hear more about that. I just love
I
that.
tossed that line off my wrist, and I was just, you know, I was just talking, you know, when I'm writing, and I don't know where that line came from, other than I was thinking about that maybe around the time you're 16 or, you know, 15, 16, I was thinking for myself, my mother started reining it in, you know, and I grew up in Midtown Memphis, and you know, I don't have any sisters. I have three older brothers, and you know, one of them was gone to college by the time we got from Minnesota to Memphis, but the picture, but the other two, I mean, it was just like, you know, it's summertime, my mother would be like, see y'all later, and you know, it was a safe place where we lived, and whatever, and you know, we would just sort of like take to the woods, take to the streets, do whatever, walk over to Overland Park, you know, it was all good. And I remember being almost startled into awareness, because again, I was the only girl, and I was the youngest, and three older brothers, and when it came time for me to kind of, all right, so you're gonna make your debut at the Memphis Country Club, and you're gonna be, you know, there are these girls clubs in Memphis, and this is gonna be, and we're gonna take you here, and I remember it hitting me, because nobody was necessarily saying anything, but I was very aware that, okay, here we go. You know, I am now expected to be a little more together here, you know, a little more of a grown up, and this is what that looks like. And my mother was not the type to ever sit down and say, Claire, let me talk to you about, you know, the world and life and what I expect of you. It was never any of that. She was just a wonderful example.
Yeah.
You know, and so I basically intuited my shaping, if you will. And so that's why I said that in Little T, I had a vision of Little T and Celia on the Wakefield grounds. Hundreds of acres, there's the woods, you can get up to all kinds of things there. It is footloose, fancy free, and idyllic. And then, you know, that moment when the mother starts saying, all right, you know, you've had your fun now, but it's time to civilize you. And that I think is where that line came from.
I
And
love it.
again, just
Yeah.
tossing off my wrist, and
Yeah.
it's been fun for me, because I've had enough people say, where'd you get that line, that I turned around and made it into a meme, you know, because I'm like, okay, so people know what I'm talking about.
All right. All right. I'm going to go to some of our questions that have been written in here. Mark says, would you share your Pat Conroy story with us?
Oh, my Pat Conroy story. Besides, you know, I loved him and worshiped him from afar. And I tell you why, y'all. When I read The Prince of Tides, and it must have been somewhere in the 80s. I don't know what year, but we know it came out in the 80s. That gave me permission, really, to be a writer, because there was a part of me at the time that I will never forget reading some passages in The Prince of Tides and thinking, what? You can talk about this stuff? What? You can talk about your family? Well, we have permission to raise an eyebrow over, pass judgment over our families? I mean, it had never occurred to me. And in reading Pat Conroy, I really understood, wait a minute here. Nothing is off limits to a good writer.
Yeah. I love
Nothing
it.
is
Yep.
off limits, and you have to be prepared. And I heard Pat say it in person, but you have to be prepared to lose a few friends. In the pursuit of the art of writing, you are going to be misunderstood by people. You are going to be misunderstood because people have their own filter and their own interpretation. And I do know that, but should it therefore weigh upon my psyche while I'm writing the story? And the answer is an emphatic no. You know, I mean, not really.
Yeah.
And so with Pat, I flew to Beaufort, South Carolina for his 70th birthday party. And I had a friend of mine that lives in Austin, Texas, meet me there, and we went. And the thing is, it was to be a 3-day literary weekend for Pat Conroy, and I was late. And I got to the Beaufort Art Center, and all of the attendees were in the auditorium. And so the lobby was empty, but there was a fold-out table with people there holding badges, and I came running in late. You know, my friend was with me, and I said, I'm so sorry, and I hope we're not going to interrupt. And I look over to my right, and there's this man walking towards me, and it was Pat. And he was smiling. He's wearing khaki pants, a red t-shirt, and he's got his arms out like this. And I'm thinking, what? You know, and he came up to me and he said, hey, how you doing? There was nobody else in the lobby. And I said, I love you. I mean, I was so starstruck. It was like if you're a musician and Mick Jagger walks in the room and says, hey, how you doing? I mean, I was like, yeah. So I was an idiot. And then I said, I flew all the way from Malibu, California to see you. And he said, you're crazy. And I said, I know. And he said, you live in California? Wait a minute. Let me go get my brother Tim, and let me go get my daughter Megan. Megan lives in, Northern California. I'll be right back. So he leaves and he comes back with his brother Tim and Megan, somebody else. I mean, it might have been Kathleen Harvey at the time that was there. I'm looking at my friend like, who does he think I am? I mean, it was just surreal for me. And he gave me the address to his house. He said, you want to come over? And I said, when? he said, sometime during this week. So it was like that. And for 3 days, he kept checking on me. And I didn't have the nerve to tell him that I was a writer. And until about the end of the second day. And he said, do you have a manuscript? And I said, yeah, I do. And he said, what's it about? And I told him about Morning Dove. And he said, send it to me. I said, I will. So I got back, and I did mail him Morning Dove, but he was diagnosed and he died within 3 months.
Right.
And so I don't know if he ever saw Morning Dove or not, but I mean, Pat Conroy asked me for the manuscript, and and all that, and so yeah.
I think he's inspired a lot of writers. I've heard
he was such a nice guy, and what startled me about Conroy was how childlike and innocent and awestruck he seemed with everybody.
Yeah.
I mean, there was something legitimately about him that was just wide-eyed wonder,
And
as a human being. And
yeah.
I was very struck by that.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a great story. All right, Edith Davis wants to know, have you ever done any songwriting?
Never. I never have. I've written a lot of poetry, but I do not play an instrument. My relationship with music has come through dance. Mm-hmm. and being in music radio, and my brother Haynes played the guitar very, very well, and he was the kind that picked up guitar at 8 and never put it down, and he really had a masterful way with it, and he would say about me, well, of course you're a musician, you just never picked up an instrument. And I knew exactly what he was talking about. So it's that way of relating to it, but no, with writing lyrics, poetry, lyrics, there's a real fine line. And yeah, I can definitely say that I hear the music in language, and that I aim for it myself when I write. I am going for the music. I've had people say, well, your sentences are too long. And I'm like, you don't understand. I hear a song in my head. There's a cadence to it. I am going for the note, And so, I wouldn't say that I've never not written, music lyrics. What has not happened is that anybody's taken my poetry and put it to song.
Okay, not yet.
Not yet.
Okay, we'll see. All right, Elizabeth Bruce Luigs says, I may be mispronouncing it, Luigs, Luigs.
Luis, I think.
Luis
Yeah.
says, Claire, can you describe the differences in the personal act and or emotional experience in writing Morning Dove versus Little T?
Wow. Hi, Elizabeth. Elizabeth was in Immaculate Conception with me.
Oh, wow.
Lovely girl, great friend, love her. I haven't seen her, since I graduated IC. It's a long time. But they both come from the same wellspring. In other words, writing Morning Dove and writing Little T, although, Little T, all of it completely made up. I mean, all of it. And yet, I pulled from the resources of my own emotional level and my own understanding of what the dynamic is in friendships. I had a line somewhere in Little T that was talking about, you wonder how far you can go with friends, how honest you can be, especially if you're raised Southern, because there's a part of Southerners that never really goes there, never really crosses that line and says all is lost and I'm going to fall down and I'm never going to get up. Southerners don't go there. We do not fall apart. And if we do fall apart, we don't admit it. And so, it was like that. And so I like to explore those kinds of things. That both books for me, to answer Elizabeth's question, came from the need to, if I'm going to introduce something and I'm going to discuss it, I'm going to be honest about it. Because I think that my honesty is my reader's honesty. It is why I write, to put into words what I hope a lot of people can relate to, but they just might not ever admit. And that's the reason why, heck yeah, I have touched some sore spots. Yeah. But I figured that's my job, to be fearless, utterly fearless, because I don't think there's that many different ways to be human. And I am not ashamed of my trips and fall through life. I'm glad I got back up and kept walking the path. That let's celebrate it. But let's not ever shy from, in shame, anything that happens to anybody on any level in this business of being human. But I think it's a writer's job to talk about it. And it makes some people uncomfortable. I'm aware of that. But other people, they're like, thank you for saying it and put it into words.
Yeah, I agree. All right, here's one from Amanda Mason, and she's a Mississippi girl. Claire, do you miss, this is because you now live in California, do you miss the food, the traditions, or the people the most, or any of that? Why?
I never have to miss something that's such an integral part of me. I can say that I don't miss the food. I'm not a big eater. I used to irritate my mother because I didn't care about food. But so with that, I understand that I'm very unique. Yeah. I think that the people and the culture, I don't have to miss them much because my girlfriends, and I can point to 3 of them right now that I'm in contact with on a regular basis, and because we all have the same sort of frame of reference and understanding. I keep very, very current with the consciousness of the South. And, that I've been incredibly blessed to know a lot of Southern writers. Susan, you're one of them. And there are plenty of others, Kathleen and Johnny Bernhardt and River Jordan, and, just the list goes on. And everybody's Southern, and we're all, following the same passion. And we are all involved with each other. And we are all involved in our chosen field. And when we travel, we see each other. And so I feel like I still have a lot of exchange with the South and Southerners. I mean, it's not like I'm cut off, because I'm not. And I think that, yes, being in California, and I've been here a long time, but the South is still my frame of reference. Because it was where I was raised. And I think we're all that way. I think that wherever you were raised, wherever you went to high school, that's where you say, well, I'm from. Yeah. Because that's the time and the place and the culture and the people that shaped you. Right. And so that's your ground zero. There you go. Even when you're 80, I'm still going to be saying I'm from Memphis.
That's right.
That's the way it is. Yeah.
Right. All right. Here's a question from Sanderson. I guess that's the last name, Sanderson.
Okay.
What advice do you have for someone who wants to write but is undisciplined? What kind of schedule should one try?
Well, I think you have to follow the beat of your own drum, and I think that that is something with regard to discipline that nobody else can counsel you. And I stand by that I think that, you know, anything that we have to be told by anybody from the outside of ourselves,
Yeah,
there's your danger zone. You know,
right.
you either do it or you don't. And it's really that simple. And the difference between, you know, those that have books out and those that don't, or those that have books out, sat down and wrote them. So it's a question of, you know, it's sort of like a larger question. You know, I mean, you know, how can I be disciplined, you know, in all areas of my life? How can I follow what I see as what needs to be done? You know, I think it's an individual thing.
All right, there you go.
Yeah.
Kathleen Rogers, our friend, both
Our friend,
Claire
yeah.
and I love Kathleen, says, Claire, how do you juggle reading as many books as you do and writing your novels? Oh, and you write thoughtful reviews. And this is true, because it takes a while to write a good review, and I know you've done quite a few. How do you juggle all of that, Kathleen is saying?
Thank you, Kathleen, for that question. Writing reviews comes very easily to me. I get all reviews I write, I do it like in about a half hour. And so I just say it, you know, and I'll reread a couple of times to, you know, okay, what word did I misspell here and that, but that's easy. Reading, I read, you know, every night before I go to bed. And if it's a book that I'm going to be blurbing for somebody, which is a privilege and a pleasure, you know, I devote more time to it, you know, typically on the weekends. But writing for me is I've always kept a book ahead of the game. So I already have another manuscript written. Little T came out May 1st, and I have another one finished. Now I'm going to be revisiting that manuscript. I know that, but it's been finished, and my process is such that you know, Stephen King and plenty of other authors will say, write the first draft, don't edit, don't look back, keep moving forward. When it's finished, go back from page 1 and, you know, rein it in. And I kind of do a mixture of that, half and half, that my process is that I write in scenes, literally in scenes. And so when I begin a scene, I finish it that day. And, you know, I treat writing as a full-time job, and reading is my pleasure. And I don't know, there just seems to be enough hours in a day for me, and I don't consider any of it to be a chore. I mean, it's how I want to spend my time anyway. So.
Amen. Gotta love it to do it.
Yeah.
All right, we're getting close to being time out. I'm gonna do one more question here from our readers. Michelle wants to know, which Pat Conroy book had the greatest impact or influence on you as a writer?
The Prince of Tides.
Prince of Tides. Me too.
Prince of Tides. And I can't even describe how many times I've read that book. And the reason, I mean, certainly for the possibilities of language and, you know, just where you can go with it. But for me, the Prince of Tides, because it gave me the most salient lesson I will ever have as a writer, which is nothing is off limits. Go there and go deep. You got to be fearless, and you got to be prepared for there to be a fallout, because and I mean, his attitude was, and it's mine as well, if you're going to do it as well as you can, do it as fully as you can. And, you know, there are all kinds of ways that we relate to people in life, things we don't say, places we don't go. So we are censoring ourselves to a degree in the interest of manners and form, and there's nothing more deceptive than formal manners, you know, especially in a relationship. Yeah. Nothing's more deceptive. Right. But for a writer who's alone in a cave, writing from stream of consciousness and pulling in from impressions and saying, my job is to articulate those impressions. My job is to put into words, because a lot of people can't. And I understand that, you know, a lot of people just like, you know, I had no idea what that yarn was, that I couldn't find the first thread to unravel until you set it for me. So again, I'm not doing anything new. I'm not coming up with any new way to live. The only thing that I'm doing is putting it into words, you know. And so that is what Pat Conroy taught me. And I've read every single one of his books, and I told him that when I met him in person. You know, once I got around to confessing I was a writer, we started talking about it. And I can always be very gratified that I said to the man who opened the gate for me, "Sir, you opened the gate for me, and here's how you did it. That you gave me the keys to the kingdom by giving me permission to be fearless." And you know, for me at the time, and I evolved out of it, but at the time it was about, I cannot believe you are discussing your family. I mean, how taboo. I mean, I was raised, we don't go there. No. You know, skeletons, you know, if you're a writer, if you're an artist, you know, it's incumbent upon you to do it, you know, as honestly and fearlessly and deeply as you can.
Yeah, great advice. Thanks so much, Claire. So one of the questions from earlier from Edith Davis, she came back and said, are you tempted to do a sequel to Little T? And I want to roll that into my final question. What are you working on now? You mentioned you've got a manuscript that's finished.
I'm not a series kind of writer. I like writing standalones, you know, that I consider them to be vignettes of life. And yeah, I mean, sometimes I wish I were, you know, that that's just not how I'm wired. And I'm just kind of following the beat of my own thing here. But yeah, I finished a manuscript. The title is The Insiders. And, you know, I think all I can say is I took on a lot in this story. And I got the idea from Charles Inzer of Memphis that was talking to me about his days in the 1950s or 60s when he went to Ole Miss, and there was a climate down there and an environment that spawned certain things. And so I was very interested in the story, and that was my intention, was to write based on that, and again set in the Deep South. And anyway, I've written it, and it has 4 narrators, and it's a little bit of an offbeat, kind of a strange book, and I got a feeling I'm going to have to rein that in. But I have it finished, and so now I have something to work with. And Susan, as you know, the work begins when you finish your book.
Right, absolutely.
Now we're going to get to work.
There you go. Well, we can't wait. I know that's going to be great. We all can't.
I'll keep you posted. Yeah.
Thanks so much. So, Nicole, do you want to join us again? Hi.
Yes, thank you ladies so much for that. That was amazing. And thank you to everybody who tuned in. Watch your inbox tomorrow. We will be sending out a little follow-up and links to purchase all of these ladies' books, or you can call the store. You can go to novelmemphis.com right now and go ahead and order your copies. But we really appreciate everybody showing up tonight and hope we can see you again soon.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Everybody, thank you so much for coming. Appreciate it.
Later.
Thanks,
Thank you, Novel.
Night.